From the Mapleview Animal Hospital studios, this is the WHTC Morning News with Gary Stevens and Peg McNichol on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
And we welcome you back to the WHTC Morning News for this Tuesday, April 27th. Tuesday mornings, we have a chance to chat about what's going on in Washington with one of the two men who represent the Lakeshore. On Capitol Hill, he is Congressman Fred Upton of St. Joseph. He joins us via the Zoom connection this morning. Fred, good morning and welcome back to WHTC.
Hey, good to be here. Good to see you again after you had the week off last week or you were gone on assignment.
Certainly, it was great to have you joining us and talking a little bit about some of the things going on in Washington. First of all, before we talk a little bit about you representing the Lakeshore and how the census might affect that, you and other members of the Problem Solvers came up with an idea to try to deal with infrastructure that maybe not as, shall we say, extensive as the Biden administration's $2 trillion package.
More than that, but yeah, more than that, yeah. Well, we had a good meeting. As you know, I'm vice chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, 58 members, equally divided, Republicans and Democrats. And last week, we spent a couple of days in Annapolis. Governor Hogan, Republican, hosted us with a handful of other governors, Republicans and Democrats, and U.S. senators. And we talked about a lot of things. We talked about what the scope should be. As you said, the president's package is pretty big. And you could almost say it's the kitchen sink and then some. It's a giant wish list. And of course, he's talked about the pay for as being a pretty dramatic increase in taxes as well. So we spent a couple of days looking at really what infrastructure is, what is doable to get done that makes some sense. And we also talked about being fiscally responsible. That is not just adding to the deficit, but figuring out where we're going to get the resources to pay for the needs that the country needs. One of the things that we talked about, and there was a report just in the last 2 weeks now that came out that even the administration says that there is $1 trillion of tax revenue that's not being collected, that's folks just aren't paying or whatever. We actually have fewer resources at the IRS than we did 10 years ago. Audits aren't being done as much as they were 10 years ago. And, you know, if we simply collect the money that's due to the government, we'd have a lot more in that pot. So let's look at that. And Larry Summers, who of course is a former Democrat, he wasn't the Secretary of the Treasury, but he was a very senior White House official years ago, well-known in economic circles. He's now a professor, of course. I think he's actually president emeritus of Harvard. But he talked about the need to collect what is due to the government. But we also have other things, you know, that we're going to see UPS and FedEx, pretty common users of our highways. They're going to be converting to all electric fleet. So guess what? They're not going to be paying the gas tax anymore, either collected by the states or the federal government. So lots of those different issues. But in essence, we have work to do. It was a really good starting point for us. My focus has been not only on roads and highways, but also ports. We had some good news just yesterday with regard to some dredging here locally. But broadband is so important to the needs, and also certainly as the top Republican on the Energy Subcommittee, the need to make sure that our electric grid is protected not only from weather, and we saw terrible happenings down in Texas a month or two ago, as well as California, and make sure that we're protected from cyber attacks too. So lots of things to discuss, but I think we made some headway and we're trying to come together. I'm sure that the president will be talking about it quite a bit tomorrow at his State of the Union address.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you, because it's not technically a State of the Union, because it's just a joint address to Congress. He doesn't have to deliver a State of the Union until next year, but still, the joint address basically around his 100-day mark, which a lot of people use as a benchmark to see, okay, where is he standing after 100 days in office? Besides talking about infrastructure, what other things are you going to be looking for in the remarks tomorrow before the joint session of Congress?
Well, I'm looking for some statements as it relates to actually 21st century cures. You know, when he was vice president, he was a huge help on that. It was bipartisan, the effort that I led in the House to get that thing done, speeding up the approval of drugs and devices. And frankly, we wouldn't have the vaccine for COVID had we not seen that legislation pass back in 2016. He was vice president. He was a big help to that. Now, we're looking at the next stage. We're looking at what we call 2.0. So my partner in that was Diana DeGette, a Democrat from Denver. She and I are partnering again. We've been working the last year and a half on seeing what we can do to update 21st century cures. We met with the president back in, I guess it was early March. He's very excited about that. He's on board. My bet is that he will talk about that as well. Obviously, the infrastructure, obviously COVID, in terms of where we're going, expecting some news today from the CDC if they're going to relax their wearing of masks outside, because it appears as though the evidence is pretty firm that contact outside, unless it's prolonged, doesn't really spread COVID. Of course, we see what's going on in India, new variants all around the world. It's important that people get that vaccine, and especially now that we have, I think, enough supply that just about anybody can get one, well, really without an appointment, even here in Michigan.
We're talking with Congressman Fred Upton, who represents Allegan County in the U.S. House, but that representation might be put into question. The preliminary census figures released yesterday, it shows that Michigan might be losing a seat. I don't want to use the word concern, but how do you take these preliminary numbers? Do you say, hey, let's just wait until the final ones are in, or do you start saying, okay, we got to do some planning around these?
Well, you know, the projections were even a couple years ago that even though we were gaining some in population relative to the rest of the country, we weren't there. And we lost, you'll remember, we lost seats in the last couple of censuses. And of course, it's important we encourage people to fill those forms in, but it is not a surprise that we are dropping from 14 congressional seats to 13. And of course, that has an impact on the national elections as well, because that means the electoral count for Michigan, rather than being 16, it will be 15. And because the number in the House stays the same, 435, you're going to see Texas and Florida, Oregon, and I think Arizona pick up seats. We lose a seat. New York loses a seat. Ohio, Illinois, and New York lose seats. So it's going to happen. I mean, the numbers, although I saw today that the New York seat, only by 89 votes or 89 people did it miss keeping the number of seats that they have. But we're well outside of that margin. So we've known for a long time we're going to lose a seat. The voters in Michigan decided on a, quote, independent commission. We'll see how independent they are. And, you know, it's, I don't want to call it a roll of the dice, but, you know, we'll see. It'll be a number of months before they actually figure out what the lines are going to look like. You know, currently now people complain about gerrymandering. They always do. It's a bad term. Our district, if you look at it, it's almost a perfect square. I mean, the law states that we have to be exactly the same number of people as within one person of all 14 congressional seats. So that means you have to have a couple of couple variants that no county or city lines are exactly perfect. But you look at our district, it's a square. So who knows what it's going to look like when these folks are done. Probably won't be until next year. So, and no use losing any sleep over it. ultimately maybe a federal judge actually writes the line as has happened before.
And the other thing too is, besides just redistricting, the census also helps in terms of clout in Washington, not just in numbers, but say other states might be able to do some things that the Great Lakes states not going to like, or the Great Lakes states won't have the clout in some of the funding requests they have made in the past, because Michigan is in the same boat as Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. For the 6 states that border the Great Lakes, they lost people and they're losing seats. Only Minnesota and Wisconsin aren't.
Well, you're right. And, our delegation works pretty well together on a whole number of issues, particularly the Great Lakes. And it wasn't too many years ago that Texas really wanted our water. We had some votes on that. And I remember there was one colleague, no longer a colleague, but from down there. And I told him, forget coming to Mackinac Island if you succeed on this. You're not going to need the ferry. You're going to be walking. So took it good natured, but at the end of the day, we won. But we're going to lose clout. It means one less Michigan member of Congress on a committee, whether it be Energy and Commerce or Ways and Means, appropriations. The same thing for the other states as well. So when it came to fighting for the Great Lakes Water Initiative, Quality Initiative, we stood together. I think everyone but one member of our delegation was there, and we ultimately saved the project and actually had an increase in money for it.
He is Fred Upton, the congressman from St. Joseph, who chats with us Tuesday mornings talking about things going on in Washington. Fred, as always, we appreciate your thoughts and your time. And if all goes well, let's do this again next Tuesday morning.
It's a deal.
Yeah, it sounds great. Thank you very much, Fred Upton, on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.